Ready to move ahead here. So thanks everyone for sticking with us, especially as you move east across the country. It gets later and later. So thank you for that for our online delegates. So now we're going to move into our last session. I think this one, is interesting because we're kind of approaching this whole seminar with this idea of the broadest definition of open data and what that looks like in practice, what that looks like on the ground. So our next speaker here, Paul Gruner, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. The Tahltan Nation, for those who may not be familiar, is primarily located in northern BC, but it has a little piece that actually comes up into the Yukon. Paul has 15 years of experience delivering business results in partnerships with Indigenous organizations and stakeholders. He's going to share a presentation that he calls an introduction to Indigenous business in a data-driven world. So please welcome, after a long wait, Paul Gruner.
Thanks, brother. How's everybody doing today? Good? And do we have a bunch of data scientists in the room, I'm assuming? How many hands for data scientists? Guys, this is a data conference. Come on, everybody should be shooting their hands up here. What's going on? All right, well, we're gonna touch a little bit more on the people side. So when we go through this, I want you to talk a little bit about, think about the people side. When you think about data, think about information, and all that sort of good stuff. At the end of that, there's always a person attached to that, or a group of people, or a community, et cetera, right? So with that in mind, let's think through that. So I think of myself as a practitioner. I do have a bit of a quantitative background, and I have sort of put some stats in here as best as I can for you folks, so I can appease that. But we'll look at just sort of some examples. Actually, I'll just sort of flip through here. Does that go? Yes, good. So we'll talk a little bit about just the territories in general, of where I've had the chance to operate over the last sort of 10, 15 years or so. This is actually my third Indigenous corporation I'm with today, which is Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. I started here in Yukon with a group called Dakwakata Capital Investments. We had operations here and in Alaska. And then about 6 years ago, moved my way over to Northwest Territories to a group called Tahltan. We'll talk a little bit about them today. They were in the natural diamond space. And then since the beginning of the year, Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. And we'll talk about what that looks like from the territories perspective, Indigenous business in Canada. I reached out to my friends at Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Somebody was talking about GDP analysis. I got a few sort of metrics and stats around that. Giving you some examples of Indigenous business, and this is where the rubber hits the road. So kind of a couple of cool things to look at. Where we're using data in Indigenous business. Voila, turns out it's not much different than regular business. Touch a little bit on environment, social governance, ESG. It plays a big part within the Indigenous business space. It's something that's, there's a lot of quantitative analysis sort of taking place around investment globally as it refers to ESG. And most importantly, I got a bit of a couple of photos if we got time at the end. I call it the people. But that's sort of the folks that this really comes down to. This is what keeps me in this game. It's interesting and it makes it very enticing and real. Does that work for everybody? Cool. All right. So how many of you here are from the territories? How many from outside? In the territories? You got a bunch of you? Okay, this will be old news for you. So welcome to Yukon. So Yukon is one of 3 territories which makes up about 40% of Canada's land mass, of which there's about 110,000 people. Right within those 3 territories. So it is a very small population density. Of that, there's approximately 50%. So in Yukon here, it's about 25% Indigenous. Northwest Territories, about 52. And Nunavut, it's about 85. I always like to throw this little heat map in because it really goes to show what's taking place in Canada and really how low that population density is in the territories. But within Canada, about 90% of Canada's population lives in about 150 miles of the Canada-US border. 80% of Canada's populations live within cities, and of that, 50% of Canada's Indigenous population reside within those cities itself. So we're starting to see some of that population density, within the Indigenous space as it relates to those cities as well. And even in the 3 territories, we see that with Whitehorse being the capital, in NWT Yellowknife, and in Nunavut Iqaluit. Those 3 cities continue to grow. We are seeing some of that population decline in some of those smaller communities. We have some infrastructure challenges. Yukon, we're very blessed here, where we've got a road that goes and extends right up to Alaska. I think we've got one community that's off the grid, Old Crow. NWT got 50%, although we're doing some more connecting on roads. We've got a road that goes up to Yellowknife. It extends about 150K beyond that to the, I'm going to screw this up, Tibbet Wake. I'm going to screw that up. Anyways, we used to build it. About 700K of ice roads. It's the longest ice road in the world that we built every winter. That's what connected up the diamond mines. And then Nunavut, there are no roads. So it's all sort of accessed by air and by water. Power, same thing as you go across. Yukon, very high, I think about 93% hydroelectric. NWT, about 50%, and very, very marginal in Nunavut. Port access, again, Yukon's blessed with some port access. And again, NWT, Nunavut, very challenged. And then housing across the board, there's some challenges around some of that stuff. And that really impacts the whole Indigenous space. We'll touch a little bit about that within these northern jurisdictions. I always like to throw in some pictures when I'm presenting, because I do get to work in some pretty cool places. So that picture to the left of the Northern Lights, that was taken this past winter in NWT. So if you guys are into Northern Lights, NWT is known for two things: natural diamonds. Because those natural diamonds, Canada is actually the third largest producer of natural diamonds in the world, and the other one is Northern Lights. So good luck trying to get a flight in the middle of winter. When I first started working up there, it just blew me away. These flights are absolutely booked. The last place I want to go is -40. We had this huge influx of and predominantly Asian tourists. The other picture was taken at a mine site I work at now, the Brucejack mine site. Absolutely stunning sunrise, and you see some really cool scenery over there. Oh gosh, what are you guys? What am I doing? I'm good. Getting ahead of myself. There we go. So very high level. I'm not going to rattle off all these stats, but the really cool thing that's happening in the Indigenous business space across the country is it's growing, and it's growing at a very rapid rate. It's actually growing faster than the national average for business growth. So right now, I think to the left, you're asking about sort of GDP, what's happening within the Indigenous business space. It's retracted a little bit because of COVID. But as of 2019 is about 55 billion. And what we're projecting at 2024, 2025 is about 100 billion. And if you've heard of something called the Indigenomics Institute, that's what they're talking about, is the $100 billion Indigenous economy, or Indigenomics. And that's what we're striving for. And we're really quickly sort of achieving that. As we mature some of those mechanisms, we talked, I think, the last speaker about banking, et cetera, access to capital. Those things are starting to come together. And as a result of that, we're really getting that growth piece. The other one that really stands out for me is the rapid growth around Indigenous entrepreneurs. And that, again, is growing faster than the national average. So we're seeing a lot of Indigenous folks that are saying start doing their startups, some sort of that one-offs. And we've seen some real success stories, particularly in Alberta and some of those locations, where some Indigenous entrepreneurs have built $100 million plus businesses. So really phenomenal stuff happening around some of that stuff. When we look at the Indigenous population in Canada, we've got about 1.5 million folks that are Indigenous, so that's Métis, Inuit, and First Nations. The reason why I mention that 5% through CCAB, we actually achieved a real milestone here in the last couple of years, where for federal procurement, we were recognized for that. And as a result of that, now have 5% of federal procurement for set-asides for Indigenous, which is really great. And that sort of helps stimulate and grow that Indigenous economy. So I wanted to tease out just across the three territories. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. There's just a couple of highlights of Indigenous groups, businesses that are really flourishing. So how many folks up from out of town flew up on Air North? Yeah, great airline, Yukon's airline, warm cookies, can't go wrong with that. That's awesome. That is 49% owned by Indigenous group here. in the territory. And as a result of that, allowed Air North to really get those scheduled flights that you see yourself on today, right? So a real success story, and something that all Yukoners really benefited over the years. It's really regulated the airfare. And even coming up, I flew up on Air North yesterday. Amazing to see airfares and this inflationary pressures still at $300, $250. I think I've seen them less than 200 one way. Certainly not in the world that I'm operating right now. I've seen airfares closer to $1,000 for the same distance, right? So Air North, great success story with that Indigenous piece to it. Northern Vision Development Corporation, or NVD. You've seen a lot of that development that's happened in the downtown area. As a result of that, there was a ton of, over the years, of Indigenous investment by various groups here in the territory. That really allowed that downtown revitalization and growth, again, Indigenous. Northern group that I used to be associated with a few years ago. What I teased out Northern about, that's a full-scale manufacturing facility, both here in the Yukon and in Alaska. A lot of the windows and doors that you see here in the territory, certainly a lot of the new houses that have gone in, that's all Northern products, right? And actually that one allowed me to get up into Alaska and really experience some of the good stuff that's going on in Alaska with some of those development corporations. If you look at Alaska, 9 of the largest Indigenous corporations in Alaska are Indigenous. 3 of them did over $1 billion last year. So if you scale, Alaska to the equivalency size of 3 territories in Canada, the lower 48, that's where we really start seeing where the Indigenous groups are going here in the northern space. Northwest Territories, Tahltan, Tahltan Show. So Tahltan Show is the one that I led for a number of years. Great stat between these 2 groups. If you combine the local hiring of those 2 Indigenous corporations, they were the largest private employer in the territory. And they employed as many people, local people, as those 3 diamond mines combined, right? So not only is it about generating that wealth back to the community, they're a major aggregator of Indigenous groups in hiring and development. Nunavut, that's a group that I hold in really high regard, operates up in a Nunavut area. I think they publicly stated it. They've got over $1 billion under management. There's a group that's really figured out, if you go up to a Nunavut, beautiful area, not a lot going on economically, they figured out how to diversify some of that stuff, right? Canadian North, again, Indigenous owned. They do a lot of that connectivity up into the high Arctic. So a lot of those communities that were challenged before, Canadian North has really sort of helped them prosper. Nuna, another group, 49% owned Indigenous, again, developing a lot of the Northern Hemisphere. Construction group. Tahltan Show, I'm going to run through a couple of really quick examples there that I think are really exciting, that really stand out for me. Some of these groups are really humble in how they started out. So Tahltan Show, love this story. Started out 30 plus years ago, $15,000 grant to grow to be one of the largest businesses operating in the Northwest Territories. One of the things I was really proud of while we were there, we actually ended up winning Canada's Most Admired Corporate Culture Award. Why that stands out for me, creating organizations that people want to be at, both Indigenous and non, across various Indigenous groups. We're only one of 3 Indigenous to ever win that across the country. So that was a real highlight where, folks really banded together and created something special. The reason why some of these corporations scale to the size that they do, I mentioned the diamond mine. So this is a snapshot out of the 2018 diamond mine report. But over about an 18-year period, we saw over $20 billion in procurement. So keep in mind, this is a territory of 44,000 people. So you can imagine 70% of that staying local. So call that $14 billion getting splashed around, and about $6 billion going directly to Indigenous. NWT, as a result of that, boasts the highest GDP per capita in all of Canada. So if you got any millennials still hanging out in your basement and you're trying to get them to launch, send them to Northwest Territories. Not too difficult to make 100 grand a year. And as a result of that, you've seen those Indigenous groups that have really caught on to that and flourished because of it. This is a really neat project. So we weren't just diamonds. During that period of time I was there, we got involved in a cheetah rare earth project. The reason why this one really stands out for me, a couple of reasons. One, this was the first rare earth project in Canada. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about the whole aspect of critical minerals, whether they be in the mining space or not. It's become really at the forefront as we look at electrifying and decarbonizing the world. One of the things that's really important to the electronics that a lot of you have in your hands right now, your iPhones, all that sort of good stuff, they have rare earths embedded in them. Rare earths aren't that rare, turns out, but they are rare in a concentrated form where you can economically mine them, right? China has about 90% control or more of the world's rare earth production. So that's obviously a real challenge around supply chains. So this one really was a highlight. So, you know, the fact that we partnered on that, built this mine, it's a smaller mine, but it was also the first mine to be mined by indigenous miners from their own traditional territory. So that was really cool. And that one's starting to really grow some legs and get a lot of exposure, not only in Canada, but at a global level. This is a real neat one. So this was Tahltan Logistics. So, you know, this is how you sort of scale an indigenous business, as you will. We started this one a little over 10 years ago, 51% owned by the First Nation, Yellowknife First Nations, or Tahltan Cho, 49% by the management group that brought in the expertise, pooled capital, started with one contract. Over that period of time, we acquired all the logistics companies in the territory, went up into Nunavut, down into Edmonton, so a full 3PL, 4PL, became the largest indigenous-owned logistics company in the country outside of airlines. And then just over the last couple of months, I went and acquired the last 49%. So a really nice de-risked model where you're going in, you're getting the expertise of a management team that knows how to run these businesses. You're de-risking that on secure contracts, in this case with your mining partner, and then we built from there. What are we doing for time, Mark? Gotta hustle. All right. Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. That is where I'm at today. So this one, 35 plus years, a couple years older than Tahltan Cho. Again, some pretty humble grassroots. Started building homes for the community. There's a lot of mining activity. This is an area called the Golden Triangle. So it's predominantly gold and copper. Today, we just did 80 million. So I think that's the most we've done in that history of the corporation operating. It's the largest indigenous business in the territory by number of employees, so a little over 500, 70% being indigenous, 30% of our own members, so a nice diversified indigenous workforce. And we're in the top 1% to 2% of all operating businesses in the province by gross revenue. And again, focused on that critical mineral side. Highlighted this one, so we got a number of really cool projects, but this one really stands out for me. So it's a fairly remote location. They've really built up a lot of the infrastructure over the last number of years. So we do have all-season road, not like an NWT where we're building those ice roads. They electrified the area almost 15 years ago. As a result of that, you know, not only to the home, but to industry. So I mentioned Bruce Jack Mine earlier. Because of that electrification, that's the lowest GHG emissions per ounce produced of any mine in Canada and Australia. So as we grow that and that critical minerals, you know, we're not only bringing forward the required minerals to grow a decarbonized world, but we're doing that with a low carbon footprint, which is really cool. The First Nation was very involved in that project. We actually have an equity ownership in that business. But the next piece that was really hanging out for us is we didn't have fiber connectivity, right? So it was all satellite uplink, et cetera. So again, the nation took a leadership role. We're building that fiber ourselves. We're going to own and operate that with our partner, City West. You can think of the game changer there now with to the home. I know people that are paying over $1,000 a month for internet, which is pretty shocking. You think of e-education, health, and then with those next generation mines electrifying and bringing all the telecommunications into that, that's a game changer there as well. Very quickly on this one, the airport, it was sort of a place that was sort of dying, as you will, over the last number of years. So we went in, brought in about 10 million of capital, partnering with government. As a result of that, we've now created that as our logistics hub. We can bring in all of our folks to serve those mines. But again, that people element, I think on average to bring in air ambulance was about 25 hours if they could land at all. And now we've brought that down to, I think, 5 or 6 hours, and we've increased the amount of landing times. So right there, you're saving lives because of that. Really cool piece on this. We're going through federal certification. I believe at the end of that, we'll be the only Indigenous group operating a federally certified airport in the country. Stats, data, quantitative stuff for all you guys. We do it as well. Those are a couple of dashboards that I brought in that we built within Tahltan Cho. We're doing that in TNDC as well. So there's very much a financial piece. You know, we're very focused budgets, variance analysis, all that sort of stuff, trend analysis, where it's going. So that's a critical piece. The human element is something that I think stands out a bit more in the Indigenous space. So it's really understanding your workforce. So at Tahltan Cho, on a quarterly basis, roll up with all of our partners. We can tell how many jobs are posted, entry level, mid, senior, professional, women, First Nations, all that sort of good stuff, right? Our data became so good that, where's the stats can guy in the room? You guys were reaching out for our stats for NWT, right? And how they could sort of mirror some of that stuff. So pretty proud of that stuff. EHS, environmental health and safety, again, critical component of our business. Again, reaching up into our partners. Population piece is critical. So understanding who's in our population, what are their skill sets, and then looking at ways that we can get not only employment piece, but that upskilling and getting into more advanced career positions. We mentioned economic contribution. So Yukon here has started measuring GDP for Indigenous. We need to do a better job here in the country or even at that regional level. So we're starting to do some of that stuff in my world. And then traditional territory, right? You get a lot of overlap. If you look at economic prosperity and development, understanding what that traditional territory is becomes very meaningful. ESG, I'm not going to languish on this too much. Bottom line is, I think that there's the GDP in terms of direct, but I think one of the things that we need to be really mindful of here in the country, particularly looking at the resource sector, is then look at the value creation that can be unlocked through things like environment, social governance directly with Indigenous, and that ownership piece, whether it be mining, oil and gas, forestry, real estate development, et cetera. All of that, you're seeing a real movement, particularly in the last 10 years, where much more progressive thoughts around how to engage and work with Indigenous, de-risk it, bring them into the business fold, and create that value in a more holistic way. And I think a lot of that is, quite frankly, driven by ESG and the investment dollars that are getting unlocked from that. So, Mark, can I have 2 more minutes? My man. This is the people side. This is where, to me, you know, it's great to talk about the numbers, the stats, the GDP, and all that sort of good stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the folks, the people that you impact in a positive, favorable way. So I just want to sort of highlight just a couple. I've got about 3 pages. I won't hit them all, but just a couple of them that really stand out for me. You see a feller buncher there and a logging truck. We had to do some large scale clearing for the airport, just for line of sight, for landing, et cetera, safety. So instead of just burning all of that, we bucked all that up. We trucked it to the 3 communities for elders, et cetera. And we ended up getting, I don't know how many years worth of wood burning for heating homes, et cetera, right? So gets people involved, and it's a great way to reduce the footprint. The far left, we were doing some road work earlier this summer. I guess it's not when it's winter now, but this summer. And we came across a burial site, and it turned out to be a very significant Tahltan member from back in the day. So it was really cool to bring that cultural piece and be able to preserve that. The lower one, that was actually at Tahltan Cho. You see the folks around the desk there. So one of the things that we did at Tahltan Cho, we're mirroring that at TNDC. Is with our senior leadership team, which is a mix of both non-community members and community members, but it's also bringing in that capacity building. So as we're trying to do that within our partnerships and our various companies, it's really important that we're doing that right within the head office. The goal always being is that we're replacing ourselves with community members with the right skills, education, and experiences. So a lot of that is sort of mentoring, bringing them into board meetings, business meetings, you name it, all that sort of stuff, really leaning in on some of that stuff. Orange Shirt Day, we celebrated that this past year. So it was really cool to see all these photos rolling in across our various business units, hundreds of people wearing orange shirts. One of in the Quonset hut there, we've got a large workforce, especially at the Red Chris mine site. So safety is a big part of that. That's a safety meeting. The bottom where you see the drilling side, that was a training program where we were all coming together and sort of introducing folks to what the opportunities are. The one in the middle was actually a traditional drum dance. So this is back in the Tahltan show days. There's a couple of our chiefs there. I think I took that photo. Cold day. That was -40 or so. But raising awareness around one of the sites that we're looking to get reclaimed. And as a result of that, we got the eyes from the federal government. I think we unlocked about $20 million for training and development, and we're moving forward to reclaim some of those projects. Last slide, I promise, Mark. You're patient. You're patient. I like it. I like it. So this is really cool. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. It was really exciting. So those four nice young sharp men there with their suits on, they reached out to me. They're actually University of Queens mining students. And I had met one of them at another sort of conference I was presenting at. And so he reached out and said, listen, we're going to present at this conference. And we'd like to bring in an Indigenous piece to it on the Indigenous business side and for this competition. I said, sure. So we sat down for about an hour and a half and talked about some real world examples, whether it be at Tahltan show, TNDC, et cetera, and some other ways to sort of unlock value for them to bring into this contest. Anyways, they circled back with me. I think it was just in the last 2 weeks or so, and they won. They won it. And they said the one thing that the judges pointed out to them that really put them over the top and put them at the top of the list was that Indigenous inclusion and thinking outside the box and some of that stuff. So very, very cool to see now that Indigenous piece being recognized, not just, real world, but in the classroom and really being brought forward for the younger generation. The large piece there with all the folks standing out, that was just us completing another successful construction season. It was our most successful construction season to date. So in this case, we do the dam raises every year. You got to raise that up for the tailings waste at Red Chris mine site. We do that. We self-perform that as the corporation. Just really goes to show, I mean, if we fail and fall down on that, not only does it impact our traditional territory, it impacts the ability for that mine and for that business to operate. So there's a lot of trust that comes together between the business side, the nation, and the community and the corporation. On the left there, that's me in the middle. I always like to say the Tahltans. I think the tall stands for tall. So Cody on one side, he's 6'8", and Kyle, his little brother, at 6'6". The reason why I put that in there, Kyle's a great shining star, and this is what we're really trying to do more of this, is Kyle he was an underground miner for a number of years, went off to school, I think in his mid-20s, became a mining engineer, came back, sort of got his sort of post-degree job, and he was sort of saying, man, listen, I really want to do something more. I need some adventure. I'm not learning enough. So myself and another fellow in the corporation reached out to one of our partners, Bar Minco, and said, hey, we got this young guy, well-skilled, well-educated. What can we do for him? Great news. He's now getting shipped off to Australia for the next couple of years. He's going to be learning next generation mining, block cave skills, bring that back. He'll be cutting edge when he comes back to Canada. Of course, we're going to have to go visit him, make sure he's doing okay, probably middle of winter. And the last one I'll leave you with, because again, celebrating the successes of people, we just launched, that's our award symbol. We just launched awards and recognition program for our folks at TNDC to really recognize the great work that they're doing, the outstanding stewardship and sort of the values of the Tahltan Nation. So it's the first time we've done it. It's really going over well. I'm actually heading out there in a couple of weeks to do our long service awards, but always good to get on the ground floor, see what's going on with our folks, et cetera. So I hope that gives you some insights. It was ripping that off pretty quick. The people side of this is critically important. So when you're looking at that data, when you're looking at your trend lines, et cetera, never forget there's a person at the end of that data piece. So in the Tahltan language, Madu, that means thank you and appreciate your time.
So either online or in the room here, do we have any questions for Paul? He's prepared to take a couple of questions before we wrap up for the day.
Or is everybody just eager to go to
yeah. Okay, listen, I want to do a quick recap. Paul, thank you again. That was wonderful. That was great. For folks in the room here, just a couple of reflections on our opening day here. First of all, thank all of you, all of your energy that makes these things work. It's all about the delegates, it's all about the attendees, both in the room and online. That energy, it's so important to make this stuff work. So thank you, everybody in the room. But what really struck me about the presentations is the diversity of perspectives we hear. You often hear the saying, two sides of the same coin. Here, I think we're talking a little bit about some kind of tetrahedral type of figure. I mean, just so many ways of looking at the issues around data, how to use data, how to share data. And I think that is what makes these get-togethers really interesting. It sort of moves beyond what your specific area might be to give you a view into all those adjacent areas. So I think that's been fantastic. With respect to dinner tonight, right here in this room, 7 p.m. So you get a little bit of a break. If your mind is swelling from all of the things that you've heard today, you've learned today, or shared today, you get a chance to let that cool down for a little bit and then come on back, grab some nourishment, meet some new people, learn some new things, and we'll see what happens after that. So thank you very much for the time being. You have some time to yourself, and we'll look forward to seeing you for dinner here at 7 p.m. Thank you.